Hey, Eric. As an 8th grade science teacher, I love the question. How do we deal with controversial topics in our classroom? And it has become way more difficult over the course of time. You know, I teach both natural selection and climate science in my classroom, and those issues really aren't controversial within a science context. And I don't think they've been controversial within a personal context or a political context until recently. But now when I teach both of those topics, oftentimes I'm expecting an email from an angry parent who feels that I've overstepped my bounds no matter what approach that I take. And it can cause hesitation in me. It can make me think twice about addressing those controversial topics. And that leaves me with all kinds of question marks inside my heart and soul as a science teacher. In fact, I wrote a blog post about it called Teaching Science is Political Bloodsport. You can find it linked below if you want more details about how I've wrestled with those ideas in my own head. As an 8th grade teacher, I think I address controversial questions a whole lot too. You know, 8th graders are trying to identify themselves, like build their own identity and their own personal self. And sometimes they're starting to separate or question their parents' choices or their parents' positions. So it's not unusual for a kid to come up to me and say, hey, what do you think of Donald Trump? Or, hey, you know, how do you feel about abortion? Like, do you believe in abortion? You know, those are obviously controversial questions that come at me from my students. Now, the best advice that I've ever gotten about dealing with controversial questions actually comes from a Mind Shift article. I'll link it down below. And in the article, the author said 2 things that rang true for me. First was, we can't avoid political questions in our classroom. You know, like if we're intimidated in order to answer a political question, then what we're really doing is leaving students unprepared to be participants in a democratic society. You know, a part of the goal of school is to create an educated populace, people who can make responsible decisions about our world and for ourselves, for our shared selves. And if we don't help kids to develop those skills at some point or another, then we're really kind of leaving America in a lurch. And in some ways, I feel like we're kind of in that place right now. What the article went on to say is that the best way to handle that in your classroom is to teach kids the difference between being political and being partisan. Being political means having a position that you believe in and that you can articulate and that you can support with evidence. Being partisan means having a political party or an individual person that you believe in, whether or not you've really examined their policies or their positions or their beliefs against what you hold to be true. And I really like that distinction. I think it's something that we can teach to our kids, the difference between being political and being partisan. So what does that look like in my room? Well, every single time that I talk about a controversial issue with kids, I remind them that I have 5 priorities that I've set in my life, 5 things that I think are important. And those 5 things for me are, I believe that education's important, so I'm going to look for positions or policies or politicians who support education. I care about the environment deeply. I think we need to have a strong economy in our country. I care very much about equality, meaning every single person should be treated equally, regardless of their skin color or what they believe or who they love. And then my last E is I care about evidence. I think the decisions that we make should be based on evidence, not on opinions. So when I'm talking to kids about any controversial issue, whether it's something that arises in our classroom or whether it's something that comes up in the course of conversation because kids ask me a question that might be considered controversial, I start that conversation with, well, remember, Mr. Ferriter cares about 5 E's, right? Like for me, it's economy, environment, equality, education, and evidence. So this particular question, it falls into the category of education and economy. So let's try to decide whether or not those decisions that are being made like support my own personal beliefs about those 2 priorities that I have. And once I've explained to kids that I'm filtering my choices through the lens of my individual priorities, I think what I'm doing in those moments is modeling the difference between being political and being partisan. You know, I do have strong opinions, and I want choices to be made that align with my beliefs. But in order to get to that point, I have to identify what my beliefs are first. That helps me to make better choices about what to do when I come to a controversial topic. I'm not just following a person or a party or what everyone else in the crowd is doing. I'm aligning my choices with my priorities. And I think if we can teach kids to do those exact same things, identify priorities, and then make your choices or filter your choices through those priorities, I think that's a win. Does that make any sense to you? It's how I've handled the topic, and I think it's a responsible approach that's worked pretty well. All right, anyways, looking forward to hearing what Aaron has to say about all this.